The bell above Madame Louise's bridal boutique chimed softly as I pushed open the heavy glass door. The familiar scent of lavender and fresh fabric welcomed me, along with the gentle hum of excitement that seemed to perpetually float through high-end bridal shops. My grandmother, Elizabeth, squeezed my hand gently as we stepped inside. "Sarah, darling, you're going to be the most beautiful bride," she whispered, her blue eyes twinkling with pride. At 75, she still carried herself with the grace and dignity of old-world elegance. I smiled, trying to calm the butterflies in my stomach. After 6 months of planning, this was finally it. My wedding dress fitting. The dress I've fallen in love with at first sight, a vintage-inspired gown with delicate lace detailing that reminded me of the black and white photographs of my grandmother's own wedding day. "Sarah." My mother's voice cut through my thoughts. She was already there, seated in one of the plush cream-colored chairs, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen. Next to her sat my younger sister, Victoria, examining her reflection in a nearby mirror. Victoria had always been the family beauty, tall, blonde, and impossibly perfect. Even now, in just jeans and a cashmere sweater, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. I unconsciously touched my own brown hair, cut in a practical shoulder-length style. "You're late," Victoria said, not looking away from her reflection. "The consultant's been waiting." "I'm actually right on time," I replied, checking my watch. "The appointment's at 2. Before Victoria could respond, Madame Louise herself emerged from the back room, carrying my dress in a protective garment bag. Her French accent was as thick as ever as she greeted us warmly. "Ah, Miss Sarah, today is the big day, non? We make you look perfect for your Thomas." At the mention of my fiance's name, I couldn't help but smile. Thomas was everything I'd ever wanted, kind, intelligent, and somehow he loved me just as I was. We'd met at the library where I worked as an archivist when he came in researching for his doctoral thesis in history. It was like something out of a movie, falling in love among ancient books and dusty manuscripts. "Let's get you into this masterpiece," Madame Louise said, ushering me toward the dressing room. But before I could follow her, Victoria stood up. "Actually," she announced, her voice carrying that particular tone that always preceded trouble, "I have some news of my own to share." My mother looked up from her phone, interest piqued. Grandma Elizabeth's hand tightened slightly on her walking stick. Victoria's perfect lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've decided what I'm wearing to the wedding. I found the most amazing white designer gown. It's absolutely perfect." The room fell silent. My mother's mouth dropped open slightly, but she quickly composed herself. Madame Louise froze, the garment bag rustling softly in her hands. "White?" I managed to say, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "But it's my wedding." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. It's not like anyone's going to mistake me for the bride. Besides, it's a $12,000 Vera Wang. I can't exactly return it." "Victoria," my mother finally spoke, her voice careful. "Darling, perhaps another color would be more appropriate." "Mom, I've already bought it. And honestly," Victoria turned to face me directly, "Sarah's dress is so traditional. Someone needs to add some style to this wedding." I felt my chest tighten. This was exactly like Victoria, always needing to be the center of attention, always having to outshine me. Since we were children, she'd taken every opportunity to remind me that she was the pretty one, the talented one, the special one. When I got straight A's, she got lead roles in school plays. When I published my first academic paper, she landed a modeling contract. When I announced my engagement to Thomas, she somehow managed to make the entire family dinner about her new fashion blog. But my wedding day, this was supposed to be different. "You can't wear white to my wedding," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not appropriate." Victoria's smile turned cold. "You can't stop me. The dress is bought and paid for. And let's be honest, Sarah, you're lucky I'm even coming to this little library wedding at all. My followers expect certain standards." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. This was the moment I dreaded since starting the wedding planning. Victoria finding some way to make my day about her. But then something unexpected happened. Grandma Elizabeth, who had been quietly observing the scene, slowly rose from her seat. Without a word, she walked to the boutique's entrance where she'd left her large vintage trunk, the one she'd insisted on bringing today despite our confusion. "Victoria, dear," she said, her voice calm but carrying an authority that made everyone in the room turn to look. Do you remember the Parker family tradition? Victoria frowned. What tradition? Grandma Elizabeth smiled, not her usual warm smile, but something different, something that held centuries of quiet power. She opened the trunk, its brass hinges creaking slightly. The tradition that dates back to 1892, when your great-great-grandmother Catherine Parker married into this family. She began pulling out carefully preserved documents, yellowed with age but still clearly legible. The tradition that was written into the family trust by your great-grandfather Henry Parker. My mother stood up, her face suddenly pale. Mother, what are you talking about? Grandma Elizabeth continued as if she hadn't heard the question. She laid out several documents on a nearby table, their legal seals still intact after all these years. You see, the Parkers were very particular about wedding traditions. Henry Parker especially. He believed that respect for the bride was paramount. She picked up one document in particular, its elaborate letterhead still visible. So much so that he made it a condition of the family trust. Victoria's perfect composure slipped slightly. What family trust? The one that currently pays for your apartment, your car, and that lovely lifestyle you're so fond of sharing with your followers. Grandma Elizabeth's voice was still gentle, but there was steel underneath. The one that stipulates that any family member who deliberately undermines a Parker bride on her wedding day forfeits their share of the trust, immediately and permanently. The color drained from Victoria's face. $12,000 dress, she whispered. Would be rather expensive on a lifestyle without trust fund support, wouldn't it? Grandma smiled. Of course, you're welcome to wear whatever you like to Sarah's wedding. Your choice entirely. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stared at the documents, then at her grandmother, then at me. For the first time in my memory, she seemed at a loss for words. I might have seen another dress. In blue, she finally managed. Excellent choice, Grandma Elizabeth said, carefully returning the documents to her trunk. Now shall we see Sarah in her wedding dress? As Madame Louise led me to the dressing room, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. I was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since entering the boutique. The fitting proceeded without further drama. Victoria sat quietly in her chair, her phone forgotten in her lap. My mother alternated between looking proud and slightly scared of her own mother. And Grandma Elizabeth? She sat regally in her chair, occasionally offering gentle suggestions about the dress's alterations, as if she hadn't just orchestrated a masterclass in family diplomacy. Later, as we were leaving the boutique, I hung back to walk beside my grandmother. Did you really bring those documents just in case? She patted my hand. Darling, I've been carrying that trust clause in my trunk to every family wedding for the past 50 years. Your great-grandfather Henry might have been strict, but he wasn't stupid. He knew there would always be someone who needed reminding about respect. I hugged her tightly, breathing in her familiar lavender scent. Thank you, Grandma. Besides, she whispered, her eyes twinkling, I have something else in that trunk for you. Your great-grandmother's lace veil, the one that's been worn by every Parker bride since 1892. But we'll save that for another day. As we walked to our cars, I couldn't help but notice Victoria already on her phone, presumably canceling her white dress order. Some lessons, it seemed, were best learned through a combination of tradition, love, and a carefully preserved legal document. The rest of the day passed in a blur of final measurements and accessory selections. By the time I returned home to my small apartment, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across my book-filled living room. Thomas had left a note on the kitchen counter. He was working late at the university, but he'd left dinner in the fridge. I smiled, thinking about how different he was from Victoria's usual crowd. He valued substance over style, kindness over appearances. When I told him about my job preserving historical documents, his eyes had lit up with genuine interest, not the polite boredom I was used to seeing. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Sorry about today. Blue dress being delivered next week. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Victoria, it was something. Maybe Grandma Elizabeth's intervention had done more than just save my wedding day. Maybe it had finally shown my sister that actions have consequences. I curled up on my couch with a cup of tea, surrounded by the books and artifacts that had always been my refuge. Tomorrow would bring more wedding preparations, more family dynamics to navigate. But tonight, I had won a small victory, thanks to a grandmother who understood that sometimes the best way to preserve the future was to remember the past. And in my mind, I could already picture my wedding day, me in my vintage-inspired dress, Thomas waiting at the altar, and yes, Victoria in a perfectly appropriate blue gown. Sometimes I realized traditions existed for a reason and some family legacies were worth preserving. The next morning, I woke to several missed calls from my mother. When I finally reached her, she was practically bubbling with excitement. "Sarah, darling, you'll never believe what your grandmother just told me. The trust doesn't just have rules about wedding attire. There's a whole section about the family jewels. And since you're the next Parker bride." I smiled, thinking of Grandma Elizabeth's vintage trunk and all the other secrets it might contain. Something told me the coming weeks would bring more surprises, more revelations, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to rewrite some family dynamics that had been too long set in stone. As I got ready for work, I caught sight of my engagement ring, a simple vintage piece that had belonged to Thomas's grandmother. Not flashy like Victoria's taste, but full of history and meaning, just the way I liked it. The morning sun caught the ring's diamond, sending little rainbows dancing across my wall. Somewhere across town, in a grand old house filled with history, my grandmother was probably already awake, perhaps running her fingers over more family documents, preparing for whatever came next. And for the first time in years, I felt truly grateful to be a Parker, not despite our complicated traditions, but because of them. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparations, but the atmosphere had shifted noticeably since the incident at the bridal boutique. Victoria had become unusually quiet during family gatherings, and I'd catch her studying Grandma Elizabeth with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. One rainy Saturday morning, I was at Grandma Elizabeth's house, helping her sort through old family photographs for the wedding slideshow. The house itself was a testament to Parker family history, a Victorian mansion filled with antiques and stories dating back generations. "Sarah, come look at this," Grandma called from her study. She was seated at her massive mahogany desk, the vintage trunk open beside her. In her hands was a leather-bound book that looked like a diary. "What is it?" I asked, setting down the photo albums I'd been carrying. "Your great-great-grandmother Catherine's wedding journal. And there's something here you should see." She carefully turned the pages until she found what she was looking for. "Read this entry." The handwriting was elegant but faded. June 15, 1892. "Today, Henry presented me with the most extraordinary gift, not just jewelry or land, but a promise. He has created a trust that will protect all future Parker brides, ensuring they are honored and respected on their wedding day. He says no Parker bride should ever feel overshadowed or diminished. It's his way of showing that in this family, love and respect must go hand in hand." "There's more," Grandma said, turning to another page. Catherine started a tradition of her own. Each Parker bride would add something to the trunk, not just their veil or gown, but a letter to future generations. Just then, the doorbell rang. To my surprise, Victoria walked in, looking uncharacteristically subdued. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, hovering in the doorway. "Mom said you were going through old photos." Grandma Elizabeth smiled warmly. "Perfect timing, dear. Come join us." Victoria approached cautiously, her eyes drawn to the open trunk. "Is that?" "The Parker family trunk. Would you like to see what's inside?" For the next hour, Grandma Elizabeth showed us treasures we'd never known existed. There were letters from Parker brides throughout the decades, each sharing wisdom and love with future generations. There were photographs, jewelry, and even pressed flowers from bouquets long since turned to dust. "But why did he show us this before?" Victoria asked, carefully holding a pearl hairpin that had belonged to our great-grandmother. Grandma's eyes twinkled. "Some things are only revealed when the time is right, when they'll be truly appreciated." Victoria was quiet for a moment, then reached into her designer handbag. "I have something to show you, too." She pulled out a folded piece of paper, a receipt for a returned white dress. "I also ordered a custom blue gown," she added softly. "And I've been thinking, maybe I could help with the wedding preparations. Really help, not just take over." I felt tears prick at my eyes. This was a side of Victoria I hadn't seen in years. The sister who used to play dress-up with me before competition and rivalry had driven us apart. "I'd like that," I said. Grandma Elizabeth stood up, moving to an old cherry wood cabinet in the corner. "In that case, I have something else to show you both." She unlocked the cabinet with a small golden key and pulled out a velvet box. Inside was a stunning sapphire and diamond necklace. This, she explained, is the Parker bride's gift. It's been worn by every Parker bride since Catherine, and then gifted to her sister or closest female relative after the wedding. A symbol of family unity. Victoria's eyes widened. It's beautiful. Sarah will wear it for her wedding, Grandma continued, and afterward. Well, it seems fitting that it should go to a sister who has learned the true meaning of family tradition. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Me? But after how I behaved. Growth and change are also family traditions, Grandma said firmly. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's in a trust fund, but what's in our hearts. As if on cue, thunder rumbled outside, and rain began pattering against the study's stained glass windows. The three of us sat there, surrounded by generations of family history, as something new and precious began to take shape between us. Could you tell us more? Victoria asked, gesturing to the trunk. About the Parker brides, their stories. Grandma Elizabeth smiled, reaching for another leather-bound volume. Well, there was the wedding of 1923, when your great-aunt Margaret. As she began to tell the tale, I watched my sister lean forward, genuinely engrossed. The old grandfather clock in the hall chimed softly, marking not just the hour, but perhaps the beginning of a new chapter in our family's story. And somewhere, in the depths of that vintage trunk, there was space waiting for my own letter, my contribution to the legacy that would guide future Parker brides through their own journeys of love, respect, and family bonds. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside Grandma Elizabeth's study, surrounded by the warmth of family history and newfound understanding, I felt nothing but sunshine. The weeks leading up to my wedding transformed into something I never expected, a time of genuine family bonding. Victoria, true to her word, had thrown herself into helping with the preparations, but not in her usual overwhelming way. Instead, she'd become almost thoughtful. One evening, as we sat in Grandma Elizabeth's conservatory arranging flowers for the centerpiece trial, Victoria suddenly looked up from the roses she was trimming. I found my old diary from when we were kids, she said quietly. Remember when we used to plan our dream weddings together? I nodded, surprised she remembered. You wanted a castle and 1,000 doves. And you wanted a library wedding with books as centerpieces. She smiled softly. I used to think your ideas were so boring. Now looking at what you and Thomas have planned, it's actually perfect. It's so you. The glass walls of the conservatory reflected our images, two sisters, heads bent over flowers, finally finding their way back to each other. Speaking of the wedding, Grandma Elizabeth entered, carrying her ever-present trunk. There's another tradition we need to discuss. The Parker bride's tea. Victoria and I exchanged confused looks. This was new. 3 days before the wedding, Grandma explained, the bride gathers with the women of the family to share wisdom, stories, and most importantly, to add her letter to the trunk. She opened the trunk and pulled out a small bundle of letters, tied with faded blue ribbon. Each Parker bride writes 2 letters, one to future brides and one to herself, to be opened on her 10th wedding anniversary. But I'm not good with words like Sarah, Victoria protested. She's the writer in the family. You'll be writing one too, Grandma said firmly. As the sister of the bride, you have your own wisdom to share. The Parker bride's tea was set for Thursday afternoon. Mother arrived early, flustering about with the china and petit fours. Victoria surprised everyone by bringing a handmade scrapbook of our childhood photos. And Grandma Elizabeth, of course, brought the trunk. As we settled into the sun-drenched drawing room, surrounded by generations of Parker family portraits, Grandma began the ceremony by reading letters from past Parker brides. Their words echoed across time, stories of love, challenge, growth, and family bonds that couldn't be broken. Then came time for our letters. Mother wrote about learning to let her daughters be themselves. Victoria, to everyone's surprise, wrote a deeply moving letter about sisterhood and the price of pride. When my turn came, I took a deep breath and began to write. To the future Parker brides, you're holding this letter in a moment of anticipation, perhaps anxiety as your wedding day approaches. You might be wondering if you're ready, if you're worthy of the legacy you're joining. Let me share what I've learned. Being a Parker bride isn't about perfection or outdoing others. It's about understanding that our family's greatest treasure isn't in the trust fund or the jewels. It's in the wisdom passed down through generations of strong women who learn to lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. My sister taught me that it's never too late to rebuild bridges. My grandmother showed me that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. And our Parker ancestors reminded me that true elegance isn't about the dress you wear, but the grace with which you treat others. May you walk down the aisle knowing you're part of a legacy of love, respect, and strength. And may you add your own wisdom to this trunk for the Parker brides yet to come. With love, Sarah Parker, September 2023. As I finished reading my letter aloud, I noticed tears in Victoria's eyes. Even Mother was dabbing at her face with a monogrammed handkerchief. "There's one more thing," Grandma Elizabeth said, reaching into the trunk. She pulled out a small velvet pouch. "Every Parker bride receives something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. But there's a fifth something we don't usually mention." She opened the pouch and removed a delicate gold bracelet with a single charm, a tiny key. "Something wise," she said, fastening it around my wrist. "This key has been passed down since Catherine's day. It's said to unlock not just the trunk, but the wisdom to know when to stand firm and when to forgive." Victoria leaned forward, examining the bracelet. "Is that why you always seem to know exactly when to reveal the trust clause?" Grandma laughed. "Perhaps, or perhaps I just knew my granddaughters well enough to know they'd find their way back to being sisters." As the afternoon light began to fade, we sat together, 4 generations of Parker women represented in that room, through portraits, letters, and living presents. The trunk stood open, now holding my letter alongside those of my ancestors, waiting for future Parker brides to discover their own paths. Mother insisted on taking photos for the family archive, as she put it. "In them, you can see something that had been missing from our family pictures for years: genuine smiles, real connection, and most surprisingly, Victoria standing slightly behind me, letting me have my moment in the spotlight." As we prepared to leave, Victoria pulled me aside. "I had something made for you," she said, handing me a small package. Inside was a bookmark, silver and elegant, engraved with words from Catherine Parker's diary. "In this family, love and respect must go hand in hand. For your library wedding," she explained, looking almost shy. "So you'll always remember the summer we rediscovered what it means to be sisters." I hugged her tightly, feeling the years of competition and resentment finally melt away. Above us, the portrait of Catherine Parker seemed to smile, as if approving of her legacy living on in unexpected ways. My wedding day dawned clear and crisp, with autumn sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows of the historic library where Thomas and I would say our vows. The main reading room had been transformed into a magical space with books artfully arranged among the flowers, creating a perfect blend of old-world charm and personal meaning. I stood in the library's private study, now converted into a bridal suite, as Victoria helped me into my dress. The vintage lace caught the morning light, creating patterns that danced across the wood-paneled walls. "Something old," Grandma Elizabeth said, carefully arranging her own wedding veil on my head. "Something new," she continued, touching the pearl earrings Thomas had sent over that morning. "Something borrowed," the Parker sapphire necklace gleamed at my throat. "Something blue," the delicate blue forget-me-nots in my bouquet. And something wise, the golden key bracelet clinked softly against my wrist. Victoria, resplendent in her blue gown, stepped back to survey her handiwork. "You look perfect," she said, and for the first time in our lives, there wasn't a trace of competition in her voice. "But there's one more surprise." She nodded to her mother, who opened the door to reveal Thomas's grandmother, carrying what looked like an ancient book. "We found it in the library's special collections," Victoria explained. "It's a first edition of Pride and Prejudice, your favorite. We thought you might like to hold it during the ceremony, along with your bouquet." I felt tears welling up. "But how did you know?" "I remembered," Victoria said simply, "from when we were little. You always said you wanted to marry someone who loved books as much as you did, in a library, holding your favorite story." The ceremony itself was everything I dreamed of. Thomas waited for me between towering bookshelves, looking handsome and slightly nervous in his vintage-inspired suit. Our guests sat in carefully arranged chairs, with centuries of books bearing witness from their shelves. But the most remarkable sight was my family. Victoria stood beside me as my maid of honor, holding my bouquet when I needed both hands to sign the register. Mother sat in the front row, for once not filming for social media but simply present in the moment. And Grandma Elizabeth watched it all with knowing eyes, the vintage trunk sitting proudly near the altar, a testament to the traditions that had brought us to this day. During the reception, held in the library's grand reading room, Victoria clinked her glass for the traditional maid of honor speech. I held my breath, remembering all the times she'd managed to make every occasion about herself. When we were growing up, she began, I always thought I had to be the star of every story. It took a wise grandmother, a vintage trunk, and a very patient sister to show me that the best stories are the ones we share. She turned to me, her eyes bright. Sarah, you and Thomas are writing your own love story, and I'm honored to be a supporting character in it. Later, as Thomas and I swayed to our first dance among the bookshelves, I caught sight of Grandma Elizabeth speaking quietly to Victoria. My sister nodded solemnly, and I saw Grandma press something into her hand. It looked like another key smaller than mine. For the next generation, I heard Grandma say, because sometimes the best way to learn wisdom is to help preserve it. As the evening drew to a close, guests began to depart, leaving behind well wishes and the soft rustle of paper wedding favors, vintage bookmarks Victoria had helped design, each one bearing a quote about love from classic literature.